In Hearing Happiness, I examine the commercialization of medical and technological solutions for hearing loss, tracing them from the influx of patent medicine advertisements in the 1880s to the expansion of hearing aid commerce in the 1950s to better understand the cultural ideas underpinning deafness. This was a period in which solutions of hearing impairment became increasingly technocratic in nature. The decibel was introduced as a fixed term for measurement. Governments were surveying hearing acuity on a national scale. Medical and surgical procedures were becoming more standardized. Assistive technologies became more powerful. And out of the chaos of the First World War, a new category of hearing impairment emerged. This was the hard of hearing, who lobbied for their condition to be classified as a medical handicap, thereby distancing themselves from the deaf community who relied on sign language. This medicalization helped to shape new conceptions of hearing loss. Hearing impaired people were not deaf and done for, but rather hard of hearing and hopeful. These cultural transformations manifested broader ideologies of citizenship that were mediated by capitalism. Advertisers, salesmen, and consumers became essential in shaping expectations of health governance by articulating a medical ethos of all rehabilitation and defining the parameters of medical quackery. Capitalism, as much as the medical infrastructure, properly speaking, shaped what it meant to be a normal deaf person in America. Godly, civic minded, self sufficient, and perhaps above all, hearing. Hearing Happiness brings disability to the forefront of the history of American capitalism by tracing how conceptions of deafness and hearing were not only transformed through medical discourse, but were also part of a broader American exploitation of able bodied citizenship. Nowhere do we see this more prominently than in 20th century hearing aid advertisements. From ads dating to 1900 exhibiting the dangers of being deaf in a modern city to multi-pack hearing aids promising to help raise happy, temperate children, the marketing of electric devices for deafness played a role in constructing and internalizing American values. Advertisers crafted and purveyed a vision of social life in America, one that reflected individual happiness and the health of American society. Deafness has a long history with quackery. Until the emergence of 20th century hearing aids that mechanically amplified sound, there was little that the medical profession could do to treat non-congenital cases of deafness. Temporary cases usually resolved on their own, but there were plenty of devices, poultices, and prosthetics that were advertised with grand promises to cure or alleviate deafness. These advertising are revealing of the cultural stigma against deafness, but they also encapsulate the range of self-help treatments that people had already been examining, some invasive and painful, others strange and questionable, and we can find these solutions in much of the historical record. You can stick a twig in your ear and keep it in there until your deafness is cured. You can soak some cotton with urine and insert it into your ear. You can consent to bloodletting to drain out poison from your body. You can make a mixture containing fat of eel, goose grease, fish bone, cow's feet, and some herbs and have it with your dinner. Or you can visit a doctor and try out some of these more experimental remedies. You can ingest mercury, a common cure-all that usually came in the form of pills. You can drain out excess wax through syringing or cutting behind the ear to drain out fluids. you can undergo catheterization, which included inserting air, water, coffee ground, or even ether up your nostrils to forcibly remove blockages. Medical innovators as well capitalized on this need for a hopeful cure. Daniel David Palmer advertised himself as a vital healer who cures without medicine, using magnetism to treat everything from lupus to rheumatism to cancer to deafness. His approach changed on September 18, 1895, when he adjusted the spine of Harvey Lillard, an African American janitor who worked in Palmer's building. Palmer reasoned that Lillard's misadjusted spine was the cause of his deafness. It took him only 30 minutes to convince Lillard to agree to an adjustment and thus fix 17 years of deafness and launch chiropractic medicine. 25 years later, Brooklyn-based osteopath Curtis H. Muncie devised another non-medicated cure for deafness: finger surgery. During the 1920s, Muncie claimed he could cure deafness by reconstructing the eustachian tubes using nothing but his own fingers, arguing that deformity in the tube was the universal cause of deafness. Fix the tube, fix deafness. His magic touch allowed him to achieve notoriety. Apparently, he made $500,000 at the height of the Great Depression, but he was soon after fingered by the IRS and arrested and indicted for failing to pay federal income tax. And finally, no deafness remedy was more notorious than the artificial eardrum. Tiny devices inserted in the ear in order to restore sound. Numerous companies sprung up, offering mail order service and special discounts, promising hope for the deaf. Advertisers highlighted the invincible features of the device and claimed that they would stay in precision inside the ear, thereby preventing any embarrassing situation where the device would fall out. These eardrums were made of all sorts of materials. Some were even patented, but the most dangerous ones were made of metal, painful when inserted, but supposedly more beneficial in resonating sound. Apparently, artificial eardrums were so widespread that in the 1920s, the American Medical Association felt the need to declare to the public that these devices were the worst of all worst quack cures, even worse than snake oil. The application of electricity as medicine, referred to as electrotherapy, capitalized on the idea that if messages could be sent through wires over long distances, then perhaps electricity surging through the body could unblock diseases to improve health. In the 19th century, a flurry of electrotherapy products appeared on the medical market. Consumers and physicians alike could purchase these machines to apply static sparks to the spine to cure paralysis, galvanic currents to the temples to relieve headaches, and even photonic currents to cure fatigue or constipation. Physicians argued that electricity could be the key to restoring the body's finite quantity of nerve force, which tended to be depleted by a number of activities in a modern, fast-paced, and bustling community. The diagnosis of neurasthenia further gave Americans good reasons for using machines to rejuvenate their bodies, these anxious bodies that needed external power sources to keep functioning. In some instances, electric machines were perceived as the only way to restore the nerve force or even harness damaged or dead nerves, as it was the case for Caroline Perkins of Rochester, New York. 1870, when Carolyn was 2 years old, her parents, the philanthropists Gilman and Caroline Perkins, took her to the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary to be properly examined by the prominent surgeon Cornelius Rear Agnew. In a private letter, Carolyn's mother expressed, "He knew from her squirrel-like movements before he made any examination that she could not hear. He said it was hopeless, and we need never to try to do anything for her, that she had no auditory nerve, or it was paralyzed." Distraught, the Perkins accepted their daughter's diagnosis. Caroline, however, frequently explored different treatment options and specialists in the hopes that her daughter's deafness would eventually be cured. When Caroline was 16, her mother took her to visit another physician, Edmund B. Agnell, who devised a new course of electrotherapy that consisted of a series of mild electric shocks applied directly into Caroline's ears. The galvanic treatments continued every day over a series of several weeks so that the girl's hearing would hopefully be permanently restored. And initially it seemed to work. Carolyn described to her mother sounds that she had never heard before: a dog barking, the scratch of dinner trays on the floor, and even the exact moment the band at the skating rink had stopped playing. After several months, Agnell modified the electrotherapy supposedly to better improve Carolyn's chances. He reduced the treatment eventually to 3 times a week until apparently no further improvement could be gained. Carolyn, after all, remained deaf. Carolyn was one of many middle and upper class deaf Americans who turned to the physician hoping that the electric current could revitalize their dead auditory nerve. For those unable to afford the physician's electrotherapy course, a range of electrical devices for medical purposes were available on the consumer market. With the rise of electrification and the surge of cheap consumer goods, device manufacturers capitalized on this excitement of electric energy as a means of salvation, this extraordinary curative force that called on the power of nature to rejuvenate health, including serve as a permanent deafness cure. Many electrotherapy deafness cures made their round on the advertising circuit, including G.B. Brannaman, who sold eardrops and an electromagnetic head cap through mail order out of his Brannaman Remedy Company in Kansas City, Missouri. One satisfied patient under his care, Virginia P. Dean of Montgomery, expressed her gratitude in a letter. "I am feeling all right myself, and don't have any pain about my head or ears either. Thank God my hearing is just as good as it ever was, and there is no more dryness in the ears since using your treatment. So you can put me down your list as one more patient cured." The 1920s overt commercialization of patent medicines and questionable medical devices persisted despite the AMA's crackdown and federal regulation. As historian Nancy Tomes has argued, the advertising and marketing efforts of these products aggressively aim to portray certain kinds of products as essential aids in the American consumer's quest for good health. As newer electrotherapy devices made for home use began to flood the market, manufacturers fortified an American perception of progress that required citizens to worship technology by implying that these devices were better, perhaps more trustworthy, than a doctor's visits. If shocks created an immediate sensation, Then vibration and massage became part of a therapeutic performance. Manufacturers of handheld devices claimed that an immense vibratory force enabled electric waves to pierce the entire body and to refresh each nerve and cell with electric power. Listed in catalogs, advertised in newspapers, or sold in drugstores, handheld vibrating massagers were inexpensive alternatives to the high-frequency generator machine. The massaging system was particularly appealing for deafness. As innovators claimed, the vibratory force could break up deposits in the ear that were diagnosed to be the cause of hearing loss. Even prominent hearing aid firms sold their own in-house brand of electrotherapy treatment. This was an especially attractive marketing strategy to retain sales from previous consumers who were disappointed with the performance of the hearing aid or whose hearing loss was so severe that it could not be improved with any assistive device. Indeed, most pioneering 20th century hearing aid firms sold their own brand of electrotherapy gadgets, sometimes at discounted costs with the purchase of an aid. In the 19th century, air trumpets were bespoke creations designed and created for mostly wealthy users who commissioned them. German manufacturer F.C. Ryan's London-based Paradise for the Deaf marked the beginning of commercialized acoustic aids that were listed in catalogs for special order or available for purchase in the shop. Most of Wayne's products were simple trumpets made of gunmetal, silver, gold, tin, or cardboard, offering various options for the consumer. The company's elaborate and ornamental design, particularly the range of concealable aids, appealed especially to upper-class fashion, as they encapsulated the need to minimize bodily defects by disguising obvious characteristics of deafness. Visibility would remain a lasting trend in hearing aid design. Beginning with the first commercial electric hearing aid that was created in 1898 by American engineer Miller Reese Hutchinson, technological advancements in hearing aid design during the 20th century focused on improving power and amplification, shifting from carbon electric devices to vacuum tube versions that could be worn on the clothes.
I think we can overcome most of the difficulty with this autophone.
What is this funny little end for?
This is the earpiece, or receiver. Don't you remember how we took a mold of your ear? Well, this is that mold in hard rubber. You see, it fits right into your ear, like that.
And what is this big button?
That's the microphone that picks up the sounds. It's a kind of telephone transmitter. Here is the amplifier. It increases the loudness of sounds and does most of the work that your eardrums now refuse to do. It's something like a vanity case. You'll be right in style with this.
Oh, it is awfully neat, isn't it?
If you were a boy, you'd carry it in your pocket, like this.
Oh, that'll be just the thing for Uncle Harry. He promised to take me to the theater just as soon as we were both able to hear again.
Hearing aid technology underwent a dramatic shift in the 1930s when sub-miniature vacuum tubes made it possible to combine the amplifier and microphone into a single pocket unit connected to wire ear receivers. These new models shifted from being portable devices to predominantly wearable ones. A user could now wear hearing aids on their clothes or keep them in pockets rather than carrying them in accessory bags, though most models still required separate battery packs. Known as multi-packs, these hearing aids were technologically superior to carbon versions, but users still found them frustrating. The struggle to conceal wires, coupled with poor acoustic quality and clothing noise interference, worked against the device's benefit. Hearing aids, users insisted, revealed their deafness rather than concealed it. No matter how much manufacturers boasted about the latest technological advancements, including higher gain and superior microphone, they could not create a device that would allow a user to pass as hearing. Indeed, as one hearing aid user expressed, the majority of deafened people probably do not know what an automatic volume control is, nor its value in protecting the ear. In other words, it is not a good selling point. While automatic volume control is necessary for dealing with the material world where doors slam, hammers bang, and auto horns blare, technological improvements could not address a deaf person's feeling of isolation or unwillingness to wear conspicuous aids. This, of course, made it difficult to increase sales. Thus, during the late 1930s, hearing aid companies introduced new advertisements that shifted focus from technological advancements to individual responsibility to appeal to resistant consumers. Irving Chiatel, the president of the Sonotone Corporation, faced this problem by first addressing the pedagogical factors that face the deaf and their emotional reactions of shame and inadequacy that obligated them to conceal their deafness. Not wearing a hearing aid, he claimed, was more conspicuous, for no matter how well a user concealed their aid with crafty fashioning, that strained deaf face gave away of their deafness. That deaf face was so obvious that magazines for deaf and hard of hearing people frequently featured articles advising readers on how to manage it. One especially pressing issue for the industry was that advertisements for hearing aids used language similar to that of patent medicine. Words like invincible, hidden, and concealed, which undermine the technological benefits of hearing aids by placing them in the same category as alleged or known quack cures. Removing these terms and placing them with reference to more modern phrases like individualized fitting that provided precise audiological diagnosis for hearing was the preferable strategy for personalizing a user's good hearing. Such messages became even more compelling when manufacturers combined two innovations emerging out of the Second World War: printed circuit boards and button batteries, to produce even smaller, compact models. With these advancements, the batteries, amplifier, and microphone could all be combined into a single unit, the monopack. These new technological advancements, the hearing aid industry declared, enable deaf people to follow new pathways through urban soundscapes and navigate their ways as hearing citizens. This was especially made more prevalent with the commercial availability of the transistor in 1952, which made it possible to design more powerful monopacks and then later one-piece units that were worn completely in the ear or behind the ear. Transistor hearing aids became so popular that by 1954, 97% of all hearing aids on the market were transistor model. The transistor hearing aids were not necessarily cheaper, more reliable, or always practical. They were, however, small enough to be contained in spectacle frames, small enough to be worn behind the ear and concealed by clothing or skin color, small enough so that clothing noise was dispensed with and extra battery packs were unnecessary. And for hearing aid firms, advertising these models required emphasizing the notion that a particular lifestyle was being sold, one of better hearing through hearing happiness, so no one knows you were deaf. The smallness of size then became the cheap selling point for hearing aids, especially as units could be built into headbands hidden in the ear, pendants, tie clips, watches, fountain pens, and even jewelry. One especially prominent selling point was to emphasize glamour.
Today, although hearing aids are smaller and more efficient, the trend nevertheless is towards disguising them, as in the case of this Alice band hair clip. Statistics show that today approximately 1 woman in 10 doesn't hear as well as she should, and probably wouldn't wear a hearing aid on principle. Yet modern aids like these rhinestone earrings are often glamorous accessories that are fashionable as well as efficient. A new model that gives little or no indication of its real purpose.
Firms like Sonotone and Zenith used educational films and magazines to emphasize how uncorrected impairments of hearing prevented deaf people from enjoying their lives, drawing parallels to the acceptance of wearing spectacles to correct poor vision. Celebrities even became spokespersons for hearing aid firms, while fashion magazines showed female deaf readers how to conceal their aids through glamour to overcome the ordeal of silence. Such advertisements did more than create a fantasy to be sold. They mirrored cultural expectations for the deaf to become hearing citizens. And some marketing campaigns even avoided the use of the words deaf or hearing aids in their advertisements, believing that they were unappealing for prospective consumers. Instead, they came up with creative solutions, such as promoting this hear zone, an imaginary bubble that trapped a deaf person from their full auditory and social range. Of course, advertisers' social mirror often distorted and selected what it reflected. Some social realities hardly appeared at all. What can better hearing mean for those whose lives are unrepresented in these advertisements? Where, for instance, are the histories of non-white deaf people? We see hearing aids marketed as ebony and ivory, but we don't really see the faces of African Americans, for instance, in any of these advertisements, or at least none that I have come across from the period before the civil rights movement. And certainly, too, post war advertisements of normality resided in defining gender roles, which were depicted through advertisers' social mirror. If wearing a hearing aid was embarrassing, uncomfortable, or an unpopular choice, they strategized it was better to sell hearing, not aids, by directly offering a solution to the cultural perceptions of unattractive gendered behavior of deafened people. For women, hearing aids could restore them to the dinner and card table. For men, they gave them effective command of work and family situations. The promotional materials don't really provide a full perspective of hearing aids, though. Happy smiling faces with no wires in sight don't really reveal a realistic perspective of wearing and living with hearing aids. To inspire consumers to purchase and wear the hearing aid firms publish their own magazines showcasing stories of successful people, real people, who overcame their so-called handicap. These stories carefully crafted an image of success that was defined by hearing normally, where normal was equated with success in work, family, and leisure. In a sense, this need for participation in hearing society congealed the stigma surrounding deafness by tying it to technology and expectation of citizenship. Deafened people who declined to wear an aid or refused any kind of therapy were stigmatized not so much for being deaf, but for refusing to be hearing. We still see this process today in the form of paternalistic reprimands commonly leveled against those who refuse to be fitted for a cochlear implant or an auditory brainstem implant. That is, people who prefer to be culturally deaf instead. Advertisers honed in this method. By establishing conformity through normality, the problem of deafness was nothing more than the problem of better living. To fail to assimilate into the hearing world meant to be un-American. To fail to conform was to give up one's quest for hearing happiness.